In the same situation, the Son stated that he could ask the Father for entire legions of angels, as recorded in the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 26, verse 53. The power was ready. The command never came. That statement was not theatrical, it was exposed self-control. Nothing was out of reach. Everything remained within the decision. The angels heard and understood the weight of that. A single word would have changed the scene, just as it had in other stories. The absence of that word confirmed the order they already carried. Remain in position, do not act beyond what is permitted, uphold the plan with discipline. From that moment on, the pattern that would continue until the cross was set. Heaven helps when authorized, sustains when necessary, and withdraws when the purpose requires the Son to walk without rescue. That angel who strengthened him in the night was not an exception, but a sign of how obedience would work until the end. The weight did not lessen, it only became bearable enough to go on. The Son walked toward imprisonment with steady steps, not because the pain had ceased, but because the decision was sealed and would not be broken by any human noise. The early morning kept advancing and the heavens remained watchful, restrained, steadfast. What began there would continue to a point where no intervention would be allowed, and the silence, which already had a cost, would begin to demand even more. His hands were firmly bound. The Son did not react with violence, did not try to buy time, did not ask for a way out. The group moved through the night, crossing familiar paths that suddenly became a route of surrender, step by step, as if the entire city had been rearranged to lead him to the final point. The transfer to Annas' house happened without fanfare, but with cold intent. Questions arose quickly. Improvised accusations tried to take hold. Testimonies overlapped. Nothing there resembled justice. There was only haste and convenience, and even so, no force from heaven broke through the scene. The angels remained in position, maintaining the silence that had weighed heavily since the garden. The Son spoke only what was necessary, and chose silence when words would have been used as weapons against his very purpose. The Gospel according to Matthew records false witnesses rising up in chapter 26, verses 59 to 61. Heaven knew every lie, but it also knew the timing, the kind of truth that is only confirmed when the story is allowed to run its full course. The move to Caiaphas's house increased the aggression. Insults, mockery, quick blows, his face covered, the provocation to say who had struck him. Each gesture pushed the scene to a point that, in other stories, would have received an immediate response from above. There, order remained intact and restraint became a living discipline. Peter stayed at a distance, trying to be invisible. The courtyard, lit by fire, cast faces and shadows, and the questions came simply, the kind that wound from within. Courage broke into 3 denials before the rooster crowed, and the sound cut through the dawn like a sentence. The Son heard, the heavens heard, and no angel came down to prevent the fall that needed to reveal who Peter was without the Son by his side. At dawn, they took him to Pilate. The representative of Rome found no fault, but felt the weight of mounting pressure. The Son was sent to Herod, returned, exposed as a political pawn, going back and forth between powers that wanted to keep their hands clean. Heaven watched in restraint, offering no relief to the system that chose cowardice. When Pilate placed before them the choice between the Son and Barabbas, the crowd responded like a well-rehearsed chorus. The release of the guilty and the condemnation of the innocent sealed the moral bankruptcy of that moment. The Gospel according to John chapter 18 verse 40 records the chosen name, and heaven remained steadfast without changing the order. The scourging came next, and there violence ceased to be a threat and became a method. The Roman flogging was calculated, blow after blow, until the blood flowed uncontrollably. The angels knew that instrument. They had already seen men collapse with less, and yet they remained restrained, aware that the Son's body needed to go through that without rescue. A crown of thorns was pressed onto his head. The robe was put on in mockery. The false scepter was handed over as a theater of humiliation. The Son was treated as a caricature of a king, and heaven knew the true throne of the one being ridiculed. The restraint did not lessen. It grew heavier with each gesture, which seemed to demand an immediate response. Pilate still tried to release him, argued, backed down, washed his hands. The gesture did not change the outcome. The sentence was pronounced crucifixion, the slow, public, and degrading death that Rome used to crush. The order of heaven remained in effect without a single breach. Even so, nothing slipped from the Son's control. The Gospel, according to John, chapter 19, verse 11, records that he stated that no authority existed there without higher permission. Heaven knew this. Imprisonment was not defeat. It was a passage, and what seemed like human control was merely a narrow corridor through which the purpose advanced. While the cross was being prepared and the soldiers organized the route, heaven's readiness remained intact. No strength was withdrawn, no ability was diminished. There was only one clear order, running through every minute: remain, watch, sustain the right time. This remaining was not absence. Any movement out of time would destroy what had been built since the beginning. The angels knew that if they intervened there, the sacrifice would be incomplete and the price would remain unpaid. The Son began to walk, his body already drained. The weight of the cross added to his wounded flesh, and each step cost more than the last. The fall came, and a man was compelled to help carry it, and heaven did not interfere. The path had to be walked to the very end, with all the shame in plain sight, without shortcuts. The angels followed the journey, knowing that the command not to act was reaching its absolute limit, and yet obedience was maintained. Imprisonment and judgment were endured without rescue, without rupture, without a violent response. The silence was no longer just strange. It became unbearably significant. This part of the story marked a definitive line. Human injustice was not corrected at that moment. It was left exposed to the very edge, as living proof of what the world does when it holds power in its hands. This decision did not diminish heaven. It revealed total submission to a purpose greater than any immediate relief. The wooden cross was already in sight, and the place of execution was drawing near. The silence that began in the prison now advanced into even more extreme territory, and heaven remained watchful, aware that the hardest moment was still to come. The top of Golgotha became the stage for many layers at once. Sound, soldiers coldly following protocol, religious leaders trying to control the narrative, onlookers seeking spectacle, followers staying close without being able to stop anything. The sun was lifted up on the cross, and the sky remained silent, not out of distance, but by a command sustained until the end. The power remained available, whole, ready. Jesus had already said that all it would take was a request, and the Father would send legions, as recorded in the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 26, verse 53. That statement hovered over the cross like a harsh truth. The strength existed, and restraint was a choice, not a limitation. While insults rose from the ground, heaven held its position. In other stories, a single angel was enough to bring down armies and open impossible doors. There, no one came down to crush anyone. The line was held as if protecting a work that could only be completed without interference. In the midst of the scene, the Son chose forgiveness. The Gospel, according to Luke, chapter 23, verse 34, records the phrase, "And it changed the spiritual atmosphere of the place." It was not a plea for rescue, it was intercession. This gesture also guided heaven. The focus was not to destroy enemies, but to fulfill redemption down to the last detail. Two condemned men were hanging on either side, breathing the same public shame. One joined in the mockery and echoed the crowd's chorus. The other spoke with what little breath he had left and asked to be remembered in the kingdom. The Gospel, according to Luke chapter 23, verses 42 and 43, records the request and the response, and there a silent victory of the cross took place. A man welcomed at the last moment, without spectacle, without noise, only the firm word of the Son. Below, Mary remained close by, together with John. The Gospel, according to John chapter 19, verses 26 and 27, shows the Son's care for his mother. He was not just dying, he was arranging destinies, maintaining responsibility in the midst of pain. Heaven watched with seriousness, seeing that even there, the Son handled what was necessary with authority. The soldiers cast lots for the garments, and the gesture seemed small, almost trivial, but it carried meaning. Psalm 22, verse 18. He had already said that they would divide his clothes. Heaven watched the fulfillment unfold in simple actions, as if the entire story were fitted together in movements that human eyes could not read. The power of the moment was not in tallying suffering, but in noticing how heaven remained contained while each piece fell into place. Restraint was absolute discipline. The heavenly army, accustomed to delivering, now served the purpose by not intervening. When darkness covered the earth, the visible world realized that something had changed. The Gospel, according to Matthew chapter 27, verse 45, records darkness from the 6th hour until the 9th hour. That was not weather, it was weight. Heaven was not silent out of indifference. It was silent in the face of the very heart of what was being dealt with. Paul lays out this core with firmness. The second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 21, states that he who knew no sin was made sin for us. This truth explains why heaven did not descend like a sword. What was being dealt with there was not Rome, nor religious leaders, nor the crowd. It was human guilt before God, placed upon the Son. That is why heaven's silence became even more understandable. There was no flesh and blood enemy to be eliminated. There was a price to be paid. If heaven intervened, the price would remain unpaid. If the order changed too soon, the way to the most holy place would remain closed. The Son cried out words from Psalm 22. The Gospel, according to Matthew, chapter 27, verse 46, records the cry, and heaven heard it without moving. There, restraint reached its absolute limit, not for lack of love, but because love was being carried out to the end, without shortcuts. When the Son declared it finished, the Gospel, according to John chapter 19, verse 30, records the final word. It was still not a moment for attack, nor for vengeance. It was conclusion. Heaven, which had held the line until then, was about to see the first sign that the work had been accepted. The next move would not come with legions attacking men. It would come with signs that would tear through structures and open access, and this change would begin the very moment after the last breath, when silence would cease to be restraint and would become proclamation. Before we continue, if this content has blessed your life, like, comment, and share. Subscribe to the channel, and if you want to bless the channel, click the Thanks a Lot button and leave an offering of any amount or become a member. We've also left some products in the description. Get one and bless the channel. Continuing. The last breath was not followed by an attack. No legion descended, no city was taken, no court was interrupted. What came next was different from what heaven did when history seemed to go off track. The response did not come against people, but against structures, as if the religious world itself had been struck at the very point that upheld the separation. The moment the Son gave up the Spirit, something changed at the very center of the Jewish faith. The temple veil was torn from top to bottom. The Gospel, according to Matthew, chapter 27, verse 51, records the event clearly. It was not a human cut nor an accidental tear. The opening began from above, as if it were God's direct signature on that moment. That veil was not just for decoration. It separated the holy place from the most holy place. For centuries, only the high priest would cross that boundary once a year, as described in Leviticus chapter 16. The tear declared open access. Heaven did not come down to crush the soldiers. It opened a way to what no one could reach by effort, ritual, or merit. The tremor that accompanied this did not look like an accident. Rocks split apart, tombs were opened. Matthew describes this as the immediate reaction to the death of the Son. It wasn't random chaos, but a controlled response, as if all of creation had received a command and obeyed, marking that something fundamental had changed in the relationship between God and mankind. This kind of action is uncommon in the scriptures. Normally, angels carry out orders with specific targets: a prison, an army, a door, a messenger. Here, there was no human target. The target was the system itself. The temple lost its function as a barrier. Access no longer depended on repeated rituals. The sacrifice was accepted once and for all, and that changes the logic of everything. The angels didn't even need to appear for the message to be clear. The sign spoke for itself. The torn veil said what no explanation at that moment could possibly convey. The way was open. It was open, the price had been paid, the separation had been reached where it was most untouchable. Soon after, an even more piercing detail emerged in the midst of the Roman scene. The centurion responsible for the execution reacted to what he saw. Matthew chapter 27 verse 54 records his statement, "Truly, this was the Son of God." The first public confession after the death came from a foreigner and not from a priest, as if the cross were dismantling those who thought they owned God. Heaven observed this with precision. No sword was needed to extract recognition. No force was used to convince. Signs and the posture of the Son broke a resistance that weapons could not break. And this detail makes it clear that the victory there did not depend on brute force. Meanwhile, the religious leaders went into a panic that they could not hide. What had been treated as a victory began to lose its shape. The temple, the center of their spiritual power, was marked by an event they could neither control nor explain, and this eroded the ground beneath the feet of those who lived to keep access closed. That moment revealed a deeper pattern. Heaven does not act only by destroying opponents. At certain times it dismantles structures. It wasn't Rome that fell that day, but the old model of access to God, which lost its validity, and that was a more devastating response than any direct attack. The angels took part in this, not as warriors but as executors of a sign that changed the course of spiritual history. They didn't need to touch anyone. It was enough to strike what sustained the separation, and the rest began to give way from within, like a door that opens and no one can lock again. The following Sabbath brought a strange silence. The body was placed in the tomb. The heavy stone was rolled into place. Guards were stationed. Silence once again dominated the scene, but now it had a different texture. The sky remained on alert, waiting for a new command, without anxiety, without haste, as if already knowing that the next move does not depend on men. The religious leaders requested extra security. Matthew chapter 27 verses 62 to 66 records the request to seal the stone and post guards. Their fear was not just of theft, but of the words spoken before, "on the third day." And they knew that a promise is more dangerous than a threat. Heaven watched these measures with serenity. Seals, soldiers, and stones have never been real obstacles for angels. The absence of action on that Saturday was not a sign of hesitation, but of disciplined waiting, the same restraint that sustained the cross, now sustaining the interval. During this period, nothing visible happened. No public announcement, no sign for the crowd, no intervention. Heaven maintained absolute restraint because what needed to be done had already been done. The next step required a different kind of movement, and movement out of time would only hinder the conclusion. This silence was not empty, it was preparation. Heaven awaited authorization to act in a clear, open, and undeniable way. The difference is that this time the action would not be to prevent something, but to declare something that had already happened in the invisible and was about to explode into the visible. The angels knew that the stone did not keep anyone imprisoned. They knew that the tomb had no authority. The Sabbath served to close a cycle and to definitively separate what was old from what was about to begin, like a final line drawn before the turning point. The cross had been crossed, the system had been marked, access had been opened. One step remained, and this step would bring visible movement from heaven, not to fight, but to declare, with the same precision with which the veil was torn from top to bottom. The order was about to change. When it changed, there would be no restraint, there would be proclamation. Throughout all recorded history, angels were formed to act, to carry out orders, to move with precision, to intervene when authorized. From Eden to the prophets, their presence almost always appears connected to direct action. At the cross, something unusual happened for the first time. The order was not to advance, but to remain. This did not go unnoticed in heaven. Angels do not function like cold gears. They observe, learn, accompany. The obedience of that moment was not automatic. It was sustained, heavy, conscious. The Son was exposed, humiliated, wounded, and yet the order remained unchanged. The silence was not empty. It was a real-time lesson. Heaven saw that God's plan did not advance by force but by surrender. This redefined the meaning of serving. Until then, protecting the Son had always seemed like the priority. There, protecting the purpose required not touching him, not interrupting, not taking shortcuts. This insight sheds light on a statement recorded in the first letter of Peter, chapter 1, verse 12. The text says that the angels longed to look into these things intently. It's not superficial curiosity, it's the impact that the work of redemption had on them. Something was being revealed, and not just to earth but also to heaven. They saw the Creator sustain creation without using the power that had always been available. They saw justice being satisfied without the immediate execution of judgment. They saw love triumph, not by crushing the guilty but by taking their place. This model was unprecedented, and the cross became the place where it was displayed with violence and clarity. There, heaven learned that silence is also obedience. It learned that not acting at certain moments costs more than acting. It learned that redemption has its own rhythm, and that interfering out of time doesn't help, it hinders. Every minute of restraint was part of the plan. It wasn't a pause, it was a mission. This explains why, after the resurrection, the angels appear with a different attitude. They no longer appear as warriors ready to crush, but as steadfast messengers, pointing the way. The role changed because the stage changed. What needed to be preserved became the message, not the body. Hebrews chapter 1 verse 14 calls the angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. This verse gains weight in the light of the cross. To serve is not just to deliver from danger, but to sustain the process of salvation to the end, even when the path leads through pain. By not intervening, the angels participated in redemption in a real way, not through visible action, but through total submission to the will of the Father. This attitude shaped celestial action from that point on. Heaven began to operate more as a guardian of what had been won than as an immediate executor of judgment. This lesson also helps us understand why the final judgment has not yet come. If heaven learned to wait while the plan unfolds, the current patience is not a delay, but a continuation of the same principle revealed at the cross. Today's silence